President Donald Trump's mass deportations are costing American jobs and shrinking economic growth, the opposite of what he promised. Economic data and multiple studies show that migrants, both legal and undocumented, have helped drive the Texas economy since 1821. Yet many Texans, fired up by race-baiting politicians, ignore the facts. Trump promised that his policies would help American workers. But the nonpartisan National Bureau of Economic Research found that for every 6 undocumented male workers who left their job, 1 U.S.-born male loses theirs as a result. Yale University calculates that Trump's policies have shaved 0.2% from gross domestic product. They have reduced consumer spending by $60 billion. The Dallas Federal Reserve Bank reports that Texas job growth has slowed from an average of 2% a year to nil. The Trump administration has reduced illegal crossings by 96% from the Biden administration peak, but Congress has failed to deliver the wholesale immigration reform that Republicans promised once the border was secure. Instead, the Trump administration has cracked down on legal immigration. The conservative Cato Institute calculates that Trump has reduced legal entries by more than twice as much as unauthorized entries. Trump promised to support legal immigration and protect American workers, but he's done neither.
So what would actually happen if you had mass deportations of illegal immigrants in the United States? Illegal immigrants have paid $96.7 billion in federal and state and local taxes just in 2022 alone. Make sure to save this and share this to all your friends that don't know how to use Google.
So we would be looking at something between a recession and a depression. Biggest cause, actually, of this drop are the mass deportations that Trump is talking about, because he would take huge pieces of our labor force out of the country, send them back through or send them somewhere else.
But where are the billions of dollars from these immigrants coming from, you ask? Anyone that is not eligible to receive a Social Security number is eligible to apply for an individual taxpayer identification number. With an ITIN, you can apply for an EIN and be a business owner. So billions of dollars are generated with ITINs and EINs, and you just want it to go away. How the fuck is that going to help the economy? Tell me what you think in the comments.
By some estimates, that mass deportation plan could cost as much as $88 billion a year just to deport 1 million people. Senator, would you approve of a package that big, which would undoubtedly add to the national debt?
I agree with the president where we need to start. We need to start with the people who are felons, who have been left in this country, people who are on the terrorist watch list, people who have been convicted in other countries of murder and rape, people who are committing crimes in this country. That's the place to start, and that's where President Trump is about to start.
President-elect Trump's planned mass deportations could significantly impact the United States economy and labor market, according to economic experts and new data. Foreign-born workers now comprise a record 18% of the American workforce, according to the Economic Policy Institute. Without immigrants, U.S. labor force growth in 2023 would have dropped from 12.6% to just 0.5%. The nation currently has 8.1 million job openings and 7 million unemployed Americans. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce leaders note that immigrants often fill vital but less desirable positions across sectors, from agriculture to technology.
Let me be clear. There is going to be a mass deportation. We're not waiting until January. We're already talking. We're already planning. We're going to put a plan in place and secure this nation at the highest level it's ever seen. It is a felony to knowingly harbor and conceal an illegal alien from immigration authorities. Don't test us.
He's talking about deporting 15 million people, which is consequentially impossible. But let's go to 1.8 million people, because that's the U.S. prison population. If we deported 1.8 million people, it would cost the U.S. economy, the taxpayers, it would cost them $88 billion, but it would cost the U.S. economy 1.25% on its GDP, and it would be monumental to the reduction in tax receipts and Social Security receipts. So I don't think he understands what he's saying. Maybe he's a xenophobe, and maybe as some of his supporters are, but this would be a disaster for the United States. It would also lead to sort of, I guess, Handmaid's Tale armored vehicles around the country. They would have to concentrate these people in camps. It's nonsensical and it's very un-American. And so hopefully that's resonating from the Harris team, how dangerous this sort of stuff is.
The economic impact of mass deportation. Who pays the price? What happens when millions of workers disappear? Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that millions of workers who harvested Americans' food, built homes, cleaned hotels, cared for the elderly, and kept businesses running are suddenly gone. Not because the economy collapsed, not because the jobs disappeared, but because the workers themselves were removed from their workforce. This is the economic question at the heart of Americans' growing immigration debate. When people talk about mass deportation, the conversation usually focuses on borders, laws, and politics. But behind those political arguments is a question that could affect every American. What happens to the economy when millions of workers suddenly disappear? Supporters of mass deportation argue that removing undocumented workers could create more opportunities for American workers. They believe companies will be forced to hire legally, improve wages, and invest more in American employees. But critics warn that the consequence may not be so simple because immigrants are not only numbers in a political debate. They are workers in farms, construction sites, hotels, restaurants, hospitals, and homes across America. If millions suddenly disappear from the workforce, who replaces them? And how quickly can the American economy fill those jobs? That is where the debate becomes much more complicated. So stay with us because this is only the beginning. When we come back, we'll take a closer look at the workforce or workers behind Americans' food supply and the people building the homes and restaurants or infrastructures the country desperately needs. You won't want to miss what comes next, so keep watching for more commentary.
How long before we would see the economic impact of, say, a mass deportation plan?
Well, it's a great question, Margaret. I mean, I think if you just assume that people are working, either working in farms or working in factories, and then those businesses now lose employees, that would probably cause some disruption for those businesses as they try to respond to that. And so the implications for inflation are not entirely clear to me. I think ultimately it's going to be between the business community and Congress and the executive branch to figure out how they would adjust to that and how long it would take and how disruptive it would be. I don't have any insight into that. I'm not sure what the inflation implications would be. I think it's a big question of how long it would take, how many new immigrants were coming in. There's just so much uncertainty about what the actual policies will be, what will get passed through the Congress, how it will be implemented. We at the Fed will simply wait. We have to wait and see what the rest of the government decides to do before we analyze what it means for the economy going forward.
We have seen one estimate that says it would cost $88 billion to deport 1 million people a year.
I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Is that what American taxpayers should expect?
What price do you put on national security? Is that worth it?
Is there a way to carry out mass deportation without separating families?
Of course there is. Families can be deported together.
So when Trump said,
On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history to get the criminals out.
Let's break it down. Undocumented immigrants contributed $330 billion in income and paid $76 billion in taxes. And some say that they strain local budgets, but many experts argue that they help grow the economy. What if immigration policies change? This could cost the U.S. up to 7% of GDP by 2028. Yikes. Immigrants equals innovation. We're talking businesses, tech startups, and patents. Immigration equals economic boost. Most economists agree that immigration boosts the economy by adding workers, paying taxes, and increasing demand. So next time you hear about immigration, just remember that it's an economic powerhouse. It's not all about the money either. Think about the people. How is a change in tax law going to benefit you, the economy, and the people around you?
For a country to deport, 4% of the U.S. population would change the other 96% in ways that we just cannot anticipate And I think that would be very negative to this country. Undocumented immigrants, they're not just producers. They're not just workers. They're also taking part in the economy. They are renting housing and paying money to landlords. They are buying food and paying money to groceries and restaurants. They are taking their kids to school and buying gas and buying cars and contributing to the economy in a way that's not just their labor. So they are both producers and consumers. And if you carry out mass deportations, we estimate that that would cause the economy to shrink dramatically. Overall, U.S. GDP would drop between 4.2 and 6.8% in total. By comparison, it dropped 4.3% during the Great Recession.
There is no other ethnicity in this country other than Latinos, where if you're walking down the street, you could be snatched up, put in a black van, and shipped to Libya. Right. Okay. So that's only, so I don't, I don't like to compete like this. I'm more oppressed than you or whatever, but let's be honest about what's actually going on here. This is not happening to any other group of people right now. Every once in a while, they'll pick up a token, Swede or something, right?
Right.
But the fact of the matter is if you're brown and you're walking downtown, you have a target on your back and you know it, and the community knows it, right? This hasn't happened at this level since Eisenhower did the notoriously named Operation Wetback. Mm-hmm. The difference is, and it's the same impact. I mean, shipping people off, them losing their properties. The difference is that most people have a camera phone right now. So we're starting to see the results in real time. And that's really, I think, the one thing that is going to accelerate this problem for the MAGA party is that they are, that we are actually witnessing in real time the impact of mass deportations. And so I think that the backlash, there's a chance, once again, I'm at 65% now. There's that the backlash could be accelerated, but we have to accelerate it. I mean, we have to talk about it. And then we also then have to provide the solutions. Just because people have a choice, vote for MAGA or vote for whoever the Democrat is, right? Or I should say, don't vote for MAGA or vote for the Democrat, right? So just because people decide not to vote for MAGA doesn't mean that they're automatically going to vote for the Democrat, right? They could go back to staying home. And so we have to make the case, right, on a host of issues, economic issues really at the forefront, that we have a plan to move people forward and to move people during this very, very dangerous time. We've heard, I think, over, our political lives that, a strong republic, a strong democracy depends on a strong middle class. Well, when you have and what we're seeing right now is why that is, right? We're seeing a weakened middle class and therefore a weakened constitution.
If you're worried about a mass deportation, a report was released to Congress today which stated that mass deportation would be the absolute worst thing for the American economy. The report states that there are not enough workers in the American workforce to replace everyone who will get deported. The report further states that if there was a mass deportation, the economy would go into a 4-year recession. So if you are worried about getting swept up in a mass deportation, I think it's highly unlikely. A mass deportation would make the American economy even worse, and the Americans voted for a better economy. So now that the reality of a mass deportation is before Congress, let's see what happens next.
It would cost $88 billion to deport 1 million people a year.
I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Is that what American taxpayers should expect?
What price do you put on national security? Is that worth it?
Is there a way to carry out mass deportation without separating families?
Of course there's. Families can be deported together.
We need to take a look at Donald Trump's mass deportation policy because this is a big part of his candidacy and his plan of what he wants to do. Economists agree that this will cause a huge problem for our economy. We need to look at the details. So, there are currently 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the United States. A one-time operation to deport these immigrants would cost at least $315 billion. It is broken down as follows. The government would have to spend $89.3 billion to conduct sufficient arrests. The government would have to spend $167.8 billion to detain immigrants. They would have to spend $34.1 billion on legal processing. They would have to spend $24.1 billion on the actual removal itself. Overall, mass deportation would lead to a loss of 4.2% to 6.8% of the annual U.S. GDP. In comparison, the U.S. GDP shrunk by 4.3% during the Great Recession between 2007 and 2009. Undocumented immigrants pay into our tax system, and so deporting all undocumented immigrants would result in a loss of $46.8 billion in federal taxes, $29.3 billion in state and local taxes, a loss of $22.6 billion in Social Security funding, a loss of $5.7 billion in Medicare funding, a loss of $256.8 billion in purchasing power, a loss of 4.2 to 6.8% in our U.S. GDP. Also, about 5.1 million U.S. citizen children live with an undocumented family member. Separating family members would lead to tremendous emotional stress and could cause economic hardship for many of these mixed status families who might lose their breadwinners. It's also important to recognize that certain industries would be impacted negatively by this, especially food and beverage, hospitality, and most importantly, construction. It's estimated that 14% of all of the construction labor force are made up of undocumented immigrants. So to do a mass deportation, it would have huge negative effects on current construction projects. In contrast, Kamala Harris wants to execute a deportation operation that focuses on criminals, illegal immigrants that have a criminal history, whereas Donald Trump wants to implement a mass deportation project of all illegal immigrants, which, as we've run the numbers, our country simply cannot afford to do. It will bankrupt us as a country, and as all economists agree, it will lead to a recession.
Due to the mass deportations currently happening in the United States, Mexico has seen an uptick by the thousands of people wishing to seek asylum and become Mexican citizens. This is overwhelming their system as they were unprepared for this type of volume. The numbers are growing daily.
Mass deportations. What's up, my people? I'm going to give you guys a very quick American history lesson, so bear with me. We've been here before, and none of this is new to us. Between the years of 1910 and 1920, the country of Mexico experienced a revolution. During that revolution, many Mexicans fled their country and came into the United States via the southern border. Shortly after they arrived, they had children. Those children were born in the United States, so they were considered American citizens via birthright citizenship. A few years later, the United States experienced a recession to what we now call the Great Depression. And during the Great Depression, many Americans felt similarly then to the way that they feel today. Many of them could not buy a house, they could not afford rent, they could not afford fuel, they couldn't send their kids to college, and many of them could not afford to put food on the table. So this gave room for a radical Republican president named Herbert Hoover to come onto the scene. Herbert Hoover claimed that illegal immigration and an open southern border is the cause of the Great Depression. He vowed that on day one, he would implement a new policy called mass deportations. Americans believed him, and they elected him as president of the United States. Herbert Hoover allowed states to begin the mass deportation process. Many states, led by Republican governors, then began to arrest illegal Mexican immigrants and sent them back to Mexico.
But they went further. They also arrested their American-born children and sent them back to Mexico as well. They then realized that because they were a Republican governor with a Republican president and a Republican Supreme Court, that no one would be there to stop them. So they kept going. They began deporting any Mexican citizen or any Mexican immigrant in the United States of Mexican descent. Many of these Mexicans had never even been to the country of Mexico. They were born here in the United States. So over the course of 10 years, over 2 million Mexicans were deported to the country of Mexico, and over 1 million of those Mexicans were American citizens. It wasn't until the year 2005 where the federal government in California came together and issued a public apology to Mexicans and American citizens who were deported. They apologized for violating their civil rights and sending many of them back to a country that they've never seen before. Shortly after that, Americans realized that those policies weren't helping. They were still experiencing a Great Depression. So they then elected FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was a Democratic president, and he's the one known for implementing the New Deal, which are many of the social economic policies that we experience today. There's two things to take from this history lesson. One, if you are an immigrant or a child of immigrants, you are not safe. You can be deported. If the new administration decides to roll back a policy that allowed you to come into this country, you will then be considered an illegal immigrant and you can be deported. If you are an American-born citizen, but your parents were immigrants and they were not citizens at the time of your birth, and the Republican Party decides to roll back birthright citizenship, which is their plan, you will no longer be considered an American citizen, and you could be deported. The second lesson to take from this is that racism is just as prevalent today in 2024 as it was in 1924. The only difference is that Latino citizens and African-American citizens can now vote. It's important to make sure that you learn your history so that we don't read the same chapter that we wrote 100 years ago. Use your vote and use it wisely. Like I said, we've been here before, and none of this is new to us. We will survive. Ciao.
The incoming Trump administration's plan for mass deportations, it's not just an enormous moral failure. This is a ticking economic time bomb that could blow up the entire American economy. Industries that depend on undocumented immigrants are going to be decimated. Take agriculture. Right now, undocumented immigrants make up between 50 and 70% of America's farm labor force. Guess what happens without them? Fields of produce sit and rot, unharvested and wasted. Building construction, same story. 13% of construction workers are undocumented. These are the people putting up buildings where you will either live or work or shop or go to the doctor's office or whatever the case may be. The hospitality industry, restaurants, hotels, resorts, they all depend heavily on the undocumented workforce. When the undocumented workers vanish, small businesses, and I'm talking about, the family-run corner diner, not just the big chains, they will struggle to find staff. Over time, the result is fewer services and higher costs for consumers. So this is the economy grinding slower and slower because we pull out a critical gear. So now let's address the folks who think that the deportations actually save money because we don't devote resources that we currently devote. If we get all the undocumented immigrants out, all of a sudden we save a bunch of money. Undocumented immigrants pay about $12 billion a year into Social Security. Money they will never get back. They pay in, they won't get the money out. It funnels money into your eventual Social Security benefits. That's a net positive. It's propping up a system that many Americans depend on to retire. Undocumented immigrants pay nearly $12 billion in state and local taxes each year. They are funding your schools, your roads, your fire and police. You kick them out, what happens to the money? It's gone. Can you replace it? You can replace it if you want. The American taxpayer will end up holding the bag, again, costs go up. Do supporters of these policies understand the economic damage, or is the rhetoric simply too blinding to them?
Historically, deportation has actually increased unemployment in this country. A study of the Obama years found that when 500,000 undocumented immigrant workers were forced out of the country, 44,000 fewer jobs were held by US-born workers, which may seem counterintuitive, but what's often happened is companies that rely on immigrants for their customer base or their workforce end up shutting down. And as immigrants themselves will tell you, they might be the only ones willing to do certain work.
The thing is, if he wins, he kicks out all the immigrants. Those who work here in construction and everything, they're immigrants. You're not going to see a gringo filling his feet with cement, or carrying bricks, or carrying this or cleaning. You're not going to see it.
That's blunt, but it's true. There are certain jobs and whole industries reliant on immigrant labour. In our piece on farm workers, we showed you a viral video of a farmer explaining he couldn't hire enough people to harvest his fields, so the produce was rotting. Now, in that particular case, it was asparagus, so it was a minor tragedy at best. But the broader point here stands. And removing 13 million people who spend money in their communities would badly hurt the economy. In fact, experts have said mass deportation would lead to a loss of somewhere between 4 and 7% of annual GDP, which would be a crash on par with the Great Recession. And look, I'm not an economist, despite looking like I was left on the doorstep of an auditor's office as a baby. But
There are 1.4 million people here with deportation orders of removal against them. I've seen numbers that put the cost of expelling them at between $80 to $100 billion annually. Can you get that kind of money in the first 100 days?
What we're trying to do is get an assessment from the people who are going to be in place. They're going to be implementing a lot of the president's policies when it comes to the border to determine what that resource allocation is going to need.
They don't know yet.
Well, I think that what we do know is we need physical barriers, we need technological barriers, we need more ICE agents, we need more Border Patrol agents, and yes, we're going to need ways of deporting people that are on that list that you mentioned. And so it's going to take some resources to do that, which is why I would argue that when the president takes office, and he's going to do a lot of things on the border by executive order, by executive action, that we're going to need to be able to provide the resources in order for him to do that. And that's why I've suggested that we take that border issue on right away and enable him to do the things that he needs to do.
Why is mass deportation bad for all Americans, no matter your political affiliation? The economy and immigration are definitely on the forefront of many minds in this election. And you have people such as Donald Trump blaming immigration for what they see as a poor economy, which is wrong, by the way. We don't have a poor economy. We actually have one of the strongest economies. One of the solutions being thrown out by him is mass deportation. If you want more money in your pocket, whether lower grocery prices or lower housing prices, mass deportation is the last thing that you want to do in America. Around 70% of all agricultural workers in this country are immigrants. Farms are constantly having trouble being able to find workers. They need immigrants. We need immigrants. A majority of the houses that are built in this country are by immigrants. If we deport all immigrants, the price tag of produce and houses will go up. And if you add on to that the 20% minimum tariff that Trump wants to add to all imports, you will have less money in your wallet. Trump will cost every American thousands more dollars a year. And that's not even taking into account the humanitarian problem that would come from a roundup like this. How immigrants would be treated in this process. How many American citizens or legal immigrants would also get caught up in this mass deportation. You want immigrants to come legally? Good. So do I. So let's pass legislation that makes a legal pathway for everyone. Stop letting Trump use immigration as a scare tactic and actually stop immigration legislation because he wants to run on it. Trump's plan not only lacks humanity, but will be bad for the economy. It will cause inflation. The complete opposite of what people who are supporting him say that they want.
Welcome back. Who harvests the food and build America? Every day, food travels from American farms to millions of tables across the country. But before the food reaches the supermarket, someone has to plant it, care for it, harvest it, and process it. And that workforce includes millions of immigrant workers. Farmers already saying finding enough workforce can be a major challenge. If a large part of the agricultural workforce suddenly disappear, crops could become more difficult to harvest and production costs could rise. Supporters of stricter immigration enforcement argue that this could encourage more Americans to enter agricultural jobs. They also believe companies may be forced to offer better wages and improve working conditions. But critics ask a difficult question: would enough American workers actually be willing to take those jobs? If the answer is no, the consequences could eventually reach every American shopper through higher food prices and so on. And agriculture is not the only industry facing this question. Look at construction. America needs more homes, roads, bridges, and infrastructure. But all of that requires workers. If construction companies suddenly lost a large portion of their workforce, projects would slow down, costs could rise, and the price of housing could become even more difficult for ordinary Americans to afford. Supporters argue that American workers, they should fill these jobs and that companies should invest in training. But critics say training takes time and America is already facing a massive demand for housing and infrastructure. So the question becomes, can America replace millions of workers quickly enough without creating new economic problems? And we are not yet done. Stay tuned because we'll come back. We'll look at the industries that touch everyday life. We'll look at hotel, restaurants, healthcare, and caregiving. And we also ask the question that could affect everyone: who ultimately pays the price? Keep watching the Freedom Room because the final part will bring a bigger picture of everything we have been talking about. Thank you. Stay tuned. Continue watching the opinions coming up. We'll come back with more commentary. Thank you.
All this crackdown on the border and deportation of illegal immigrants, what do you think it's going to have as an effect on our economy? Because a lot of these jobs and industries rely on undocumented workers for work. What are we going to do?
If you're like these folks and you are all in on mass deportation, or even if you know someone who is, you are going to want to hear this. And this is important because just in September, a poll showed that 54% of Americans support mass deportation, including 25% of Democrats. But that's only until they've been told the consequences of that plan. And I am now well equipped to tell you those consequences because I just attended a fascinating webinar with the American Immigration Council in which they did a deep dive on how this policy will affect our economy. And it's called Mass Deportation, Devastating Cost to America, Its Budget, and Economy. Let's just go over the top lines. So first, how many people is Trump talking about deporting? Well, he says 10 million, he says 20 million, he says 30 million undocumented people. There's not actually that many undocumented people in the country. The study uses a very research-based number, 13.3 million. This number doesn't include people who came to the U.S. through parole programs. They are here legally. Trump still wants to deport them as well. And also, Trump wants to deport now naturalized citizens as well. This is something called remigration. You should Google it. But again, this study just looks at undocumented people, 13.3 million of them. Now, the first thing to know is that we have no system in place for going out and rounding up all of those people. That doesn't exist. ICE doesn't do that. They find undocumented people when they come into the law enforcement system. So that system would need to be created out of whole cloth. So going into communities and arresting people turns out to be extremely expensive. ICE would need to hire about 31,000 more agents, and this part, just the arresting, would cost about $7 billion a year. So next is the cost of actually detaining these people, because we only right now have the capacity to detain about 40,000 undocumented people at a time. So what Trump wants to do would require detaining about 1 million people at a time, and that would require them to build massive tent structures down by the border. Those are incredibly expensive to build. Then there's the cost of legal proceedings, because before someone can be deported, there has to be a removal order. That's a court case. That's the law. There are already 3.7 million cases pending in immigration court, so you would have to hire new ICE prosecutors, new courtrooms, new staff, new judges. Then there is the cost of removal itself, and this is setting aside the logistical difficulties that half of the countries these people come from will not take them back. So we have to find third countries that will take them. Hugely difficult. Then the cost. So the ICE director in a hearing last year said that one single flight hour of an ICE deportation flight costs $17,000. So multiply that by these millions of people. They're saying the removal process, the average flight cost, ground transportation, all that, $21 billion to remove 1 million immigrants annually. They also said to bear in mind that right now there is a plane shortage, there is a pilot shortage. We have never in the history of our country deported more than 230,000 people in a year, ever. But Trump is saying that we're going to do 10 million in a year. It is logistically impossible for all the reasons I've just stated. It cannot actually happen, but let's say that it could. These people decided to analyze what would that cost. Let's say you could do it. And they found it would cost $350 billion just for the deportation, not its impact on the economy. So then they analyzed it the other way. Let's say they do 1 million people a year. How much is that going to cost? Well, it turns out that is 3 times as expensive. Now, again, this is much more likely the way they'd have to do it. If we did it that way, how much would it cost? $967.9 billion, almost $1 trillion, and that's if inflation stays at 2.9%, which if Trump is elected, it won't. And of course, there are the costs to the morale and the psyche of the country, the mass trauma that will be caused by the family separations. Law enforcement, military, National Guard, moving through cities, going into households, ripping apart, because remember, many of these families are mixed, right? Undocumented people live with citizens. Their children are citizens. So we're talking mass family separation, and also our law enforcement and our military being focused not on their jobs, but on this massive deportation. Now let's look at what it will do to our economy. Our GDP would shrink by between 1.1 and 2.2 trillion dollars. That's between 4 and 6% shrinkage in our GDP. 4.3% shrinkage was what we had during the Great Recession. So we're looking at a recession. Tax revenues will fall 29 billion in the states and 46 billion federal taxes gone. Undocumented immigrants also contribute $22.6 billion to Social Security and 5.7 billion to Medicare. All that money gone. And think about this. Construction and agriculture are both going to lose 1 in 8 workers. Think about what that's going to do to housing prices and food prices. Hospitality is going to lose 1 in 14 workers. Think about what that's going to do to tourism. The restaurant industry will be gutted, and childcare, forget it. Now, the last thing I'll tell you is they also looked at what would happen if you did the opposite of Trump's plan. Putting undocumented immigrants on a pathway to citizenship, which is what Kamala Harris wants to do, would increase U.S. GDP by $1.7 trillion over 10 years. It would raise wages for all Americans, and it would create hundreds of thousands of new jobs. Do you see why Trump's plan is not only impracticable, but stupid? So what these signs really should say, tank our economy now, because that's what they mean. Not so psyched about waving that sign? Good. Then for God's sake, don't vote for it.
If you are a supporter of mass deportations of undocumented immigrants, I want you to sit here for a minute and dare yourself to get through the video having the same belief that you did at the start. Because if you think about it for 5 minutes, you'll realize that this is not in your best interest, unless you have a lot of money or are kind of racist. When you mass deport undocumented workers, what you're doing is you're removing the labor pool for all of the jobs at the bottom of the American labor ladder. All of the jobs that require a lot of work and pay very little. The reason why undocumented workers have to work those jobs is because they do not have documents. They cannot get better jobs, and employers use that labor because it's cheap, because they can exploit them. They're not protected under the same protections that American workers are protected under. So they can pay them pennies on the dollar for the work that they're giving them. Suddenly that labor pool is going to disappear overnight, either because these workers are going to stay home for fear of deportation, or they're going to be caught by ICE and deported. Suddenly these sectors are going to become a lot more expensive to do business within. This includes the farming sector, people that harvest our fruits, our vegetables, our eggs, and our slaughterhouses, people that build our houses and our buildings in large and small private independent contractor crews. These include people that work in the supply chain that get products and services from point A to point B. This includes people that work in maintenance and custodial crews, people that keep our buildings safe and clean and maintained, and people that work in hospitality and cleaning services, people that keep hotels, hospitals, and doctors' offices clean and sanitized. Suddenly the price of all of these industries is going to skyrocket, because when you remove the cheap labor from a situation, suddenly it becomes more expensive to do the same thing that you were doing for pennies on the dollar yesterday, with no one to fill that labor pool, because Americans are not going to want to work for pennies on the dollar. So two things are going to happen. Either Americans are going to start working those jobs and demand significantly higher wages, or Americans are not going to work those jobs. Americans will not work those jobs unless they're desperate to work those jobs. Well, guess what? As those jobs remain unfilled or as those new workers demand higher wages, the price of business in those sectors goes up. And when the price goes up for doing business, the price is invariably going to be passed on to the consumer. They are going to raise the prices for their goods and services to compensate the raise of the cost of doing business. You're going to pay double or triple the grocery prices that you currently pay because no one will be there to make it cheaper for those industries to operate like they're used to. Suddenly it becomes prohibitively expensive for you to buy groceries, for you to go out to eat, for you to visit a hotel, for you to go anywhere. It's going to be significantly less safe to go to the hospital because people will not be cleaning. Everything across the board is going to be affected because you've essentially immediately dried up a labor pool that was of essential workers. And guess what happens when the cost of everything goes up? We call that inflation, runaway inflation. And when runaway inflation happens, we risk another Great Depression because the cost of goods and services is going to be way too expensive for us to be able to afford, and we're going to have to rush to get more and more jobs, and those jobs are going to smell our desperation and pay less and less for our labor. So we are going to get less money and have to pay more money just to live. You still think this is a good idea?
They come here because of the opportunity. Some are coming with drugs. Some are coming with human trafficking. Some are coming for no good reason. Some are organizing the other ones as banditos and coyotes and other malefactors. But most, overwhelmingly, are coming for the jobs. Yes, they're taking our jobs. No, they're not taking our jobs. They are taking jobs that you don't want. Now, is that absolutely true? No. Some of the jobs they take are jobs that Americans may want. Very rarely is something 100-0 in terms of the equities involved. But overwhelmingly, they are taking jobs that are unfilled because Americans do not want them or can't live on the wages that they get paid to do them. So that's why they're coming. So what happens when they leave? You now have people in a lot of the service industries and agro-business that aren't there. So what is that going to do? It's going to reduce services. It's going to make it more expensive to get things picked, sorted, packaged, delivered, cleaned, cooked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that will be a challenge for the economy. And that's why I don't believe that Trump does a deportation of all of them. I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's legal. I don't think logistically it makes sense in terms of how expensive it would be.
Breaking news, I've got some startling numbers from the recently passed Big Beautiful Bill that pertains to the mass deportations. Unbelievable. This bill will give $170 billion for the deportation effort. That means that they're funding these ICE deportation raids and imprisonments at the same amount of money comparable to what Russia spends on its entire military program. This big, beautiful bill includes $45 billion for new jails. That might be enough money to imprison more people than are already imprisoned. This will also effectively triple ICE's current operation budget, which means we can expect to see militarized ICE operations in every major city where there is a large immigrant presence. On top of that, Trump will have $3.5 billion to reward cooperative red states who want to do projects similar to the Alligator Alcatraz in Florida. Trump has been using propaganda to stir up fear among American people for over a decade with a false narrative of immigrant crime. We know statistically that our immigrant community has a very low crime level. In fact, lower than any other community. These, by and large, are people who are here to work, who are here to serve American people and try to better their lives and help their families, often living still in their home countries. These manufactured crises have been a profit-making opportunity for profit prisons and other allies of Trump in the red states. So while pretending to be an ally of the poor and working class in the United States, the Trump movement today has given historic tax breaks to the ultra-wealthy, and now we are seeing deep cuts to Medicaid and food assistance for the hungry. Even yesterday, millions of dollars of federal funding for after-school programs have been cut off. Please like, share, and follow. Each day I try to provide TikToks with underreported news and analysis. I thank you for watching and see you in the next video.
Tom Homan, he engaged in a public back and forth with Mike Johnston. That's the Democratic mayor of Denver. Homan threatened to jail Johnston after the mayor said that his city will resist efforts to use the military to carry out deportations. And here's Johnston's response to all this.
What we're not going to do is support deploying the 101st Airborne into American cities to pull 10-year-old kids out of their classrooms in handcuffs. I think America's not after another conflict on this issue. If they are going to send the U.S. Army or the Navy SEALs into Denver to pursue folks to pull them off the job at hotels or restaurants where they're working or pull kids off the soccer field, I think we will see Denverites and folks around the country who will nonviolently resist that.
Do you expect mass protests in response to mass deportations?
I do, but I also don't expect mass deportations. I think that it sounds good and they look like the tough guys, and we know that that has really been their brand, is to basically look like the bullies that they are. But, you know, when you start to get into the nitty gritty and start to talk about details, that's when they're like, well, we didn't realize this or that. Or even when you start to talk about the cost. When we start to ramp up what the cost will look like for us to actually effectuate this, but then also look at the cost to our economy, I just don't really see it happening.
Welcome back. The economic cost could reach everyone. Hotels, restaurants, tourism, businesses rely on workers who keep the industry moving every single day. From kitchens and housekeeping, transportation, customer service, immigration workers play important role across the hospitality industry. If businesses suddenly lost a large part of their workforce, they may struggle to find replacement. They could face higher labor costs, reduced services, shorter opening hours, or higher prices for customers. And then there is healthcare, perhaps one of the most sensitive areas of all. America already faces shortage in many healthcare professions. Immigrants work as doctors, nurses, caregivers, home health aides, and support workers. A major reduction in the workforce could place even more pressure on hospitals, nursing homes, and communities that already struggle to find medical professionals. For patients, this is no longer just an immigration debate. It becomes a question of access to care. So when we talk about mass deportation, the conversation cannot stop at the border. It must also ask, who will harvest Americans' food? Who will build the homes? Who will serve the restaurants? Who will clean the hotels? Who will care for aging population? Supporters believe stronger enforcement could protect American workers, strengthen the rules of law, and encourage businesses to hire legally. Critics warn that removing millions of workers could create labor shortage, higher costs, and economic disruption that affects everyone. The truth is that economic consequences could be far more complicated than either sides of or suggestions. Mass deportation may change the workforce. but the effect could spread far beyond immigration communities. They could reach businesses, consumers, industries, and families across America. Because the legal or the real question may not only be who gets deported, the biggest question may be who pays the price afterward. This is the Freedom Room. Like, share, subscribe to my channel for more commentary. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.